The pandemic has shut down economies around the globe, but our next guest says it's speeding up trends that were already in place. Ruchir Sharma is Chief Global Strategist at Morgan Stanley Investment Management. Ruchir's latest book, The 10 Rules of Successful Nations, was released on April 1st, and we had you on and talked a little bit about that, Ruchir, and there was some optimism present there in terms of how the United States and I guess other countries will eventually emerge from this. But in the meantime, you point out that a lot of trends were accelerated, not new trends, but just trends that were in place, accelerated by the pandemic, whether it's nationalism, slowdown of global trade, all the video conferencing and working at home. But it is a little bit strange that we were already on that path, and this just has moved us more quickly down the same road.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's the strange nature of this crisis, that it's just coincidence that trends which were already taking place, such as deglobalization, digitization, democracy in retreat, some of those trends I had spoken about at the beginning of this year as trends that were likely to dominate this decade. And those trends have just been accelerated because the nature of this crisis is such. And I think that that is something which is also being reflected in the marketplace, which is that the polarization we've seen in the market between a few super aggressive growth stocks doing well and the rest of the market languishing, that's another trend that we entered this decade with, and that has also been accelerated by this crisis. So it's happening across the world, which is that trends which were already in place have been accelerated in a dramatic way in this crisis. What we thought would happen over 5 or 10 years, in some ways, have happened in 5 or 6 weeks.
There are some parallels, in your view, to what happened after the Spanish flu, the Roaring '20s. I mean, there was, obviously, those were some pretty heady times, but they were, on the other side of that was the Great Depression, too. Do you think there's similarities that in some way that when we come out of this, that we're looking forward to that because of all the debt we've built up, or is it disturbing, the parallels?
Yeah, the parallel that I really made with past pandemics was that so many of us, when we're in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a crisis, want to extrapolate just based on what's happened today. And yeah, my point is the fact that it's not always that what happens next is determined by what happens today. So I quote the Spanish influenza and saying that it was such a devastating impact on the world, and yet it told us not that much about what was going to happen in the 1920s. Similarly, the 57-58 pandemic, which killed more than 2 million people worldwide, much larger than anything which is projected with the current episode in terms of its share of global population. And yet nobody even remembers what 57-58, that Asian flu, was all about. The Hong Kong flu of 67-68, 1 million people died, and yet nobody really remembers what those episodes were about. So I think that's the limited point that I'm making, that when we're in the midst of a crisis, we want to think that the world's going to be turned upside down because of what we're experiencing today. And my point is that if you look at the past, it either did not tell you much about the future, or that some of the trends that were already in place just got accelerated. So that is the point that I was trying to make by drawing the parallels with the Spanish flu, for example, of 1918, 1919.